Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Scott.
It
Appreciate it.
is a pleasure. We have a close mutual friend, and we are both Philadelphians. Although we were going to do this in person, but it's fine. We're remotely in the same city, and the city that we live in, the city founded by by English folks, Penn's Woods. Here we go. The city of brotherly love is just ecstatic right now because of the victory of the Eagles.
Go Birds! I mean, for real, for reals. I watched the Super Bowl, and I don't normally even watch the Super Bowl. I really don't. The last football game.
Why don't you watch the Super Bowl? No, you're a minority of Americans. Most people that are not sports fans,
I know,
not football fans. Most people
still watch the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Well, I just figure, it's a nice little day off because most people are not trying to ask me to do something. So I actually watch a movie instead, usually, but not on yesterday. Yesterday, I really, actually, my mom is in the rehab right now in order to, she just had full knee replacement. So she's in the physical rehab. So I went down with her I went to the rehab to meet up with her and watch it there. So I was there way past visiting hours, making all kind of noise. I'm sure keeping people up. But she said, Lisa, I want you to watch this with me. She doesn't even normally watch football. I never have watched football with her in my entire life, the whole life. And yet she said, I want you to watch this with me. I was like, okay, let's do it. So got her some Popeyes, on Broad Street and some cupcakes also on Broad Street. We had a good time. I mean, I screamed more in one game than I have in my whole life. That was an incredible game.
And it was a little bit of a rout. I mean, it was not a close game. It was really the Eagles dominating.
Yeah.
One of the best teams in football. It was
the last 3 minutes they started to come back, but thank God it was only 3 minutes,
I wonder if Taylor Swift told her boyfriend, I just don't, like Trump, I don't date losers. Okay, I like my boyfriends not losers. Okay. Yeah, I mean it's tough, it's tough, but she's Taylor Swift, she can handle it.
Oh my gosh. And I mean, honestly, probably the best part about last night, besides the fact of winning, was the reality that Trump was there to witness the Black national anthem. That was the best part. And also the rapping, that happened in the middle of it. I mean, it was just the halftime show. I don't even know. I can't even imagine Trump actually sitting there and listening to that. But that just felt like, yes.
A great halftime show. Not great if you're a Drake fan.
No, well, yeah, that's true.
That's true. But isn't Drake Canadian? True. What do we care, really? We're taking them over anyway, right? They're going to be the 51st state.
Well, I mean, it needs to be said that it is actually well known and reported even in the New York Times today that the allegations against him made in the song are not true. And everybody knows it's not true. It's just that now he has a lawsuit actually coming, because it's not true. But so it's made for the sake of entertainment, but that's really, I just think that's actually, honestly, I just think that's really unethical, but yet it's got a great beat. You know what I mean? It makes you want to dance. It makes you want to sing, even though it's really dark stuff he's talking about and untrue.
What's interesting about Drake? Jewish, not a lot of Black Jews. I have a couple of Black Jewish friends. They're not, I mean, there's just not a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Drake, I don't think Drake's ever made the Hanukkah song. Adam Sandler. I don't think. And I mean, you would think that he would be a,
what?
Primo, right? When Adam Sandler redoes the Hanukkah song periodically and lists all these celebrities who are Jewish, and Drake has never made the list. That's fascinating.
He should. That should be his next thing. I mean, he is so diverse in what he does. He should do the Hanukkah song next.
He should just no. I mean, Sandler should put in a line about. I mean, everybody in show business that's mentioned in that song.
Actually, it literally might just break him back out, out of this fog from the last year.
Do you have ethical concerns about football? So this is good. You don't like football because I think
no, I didn't say that. I didn't say I didn't.
Or you're not a huge fan. You're not a regular fan.
Watch it very often.
You don't watch it.
Let me make the distinction. I actually love football.
Okay, you do.
Yeah, when I know who to root for, I'm good. I mean, I went to all the games when I was at USC, you know, the Trojans and all that. And at Rutgers, RU Rah Rah, that was my undergrad and in grad school. But, you know, once you get out of college, it's like, okay, what city do you live in? Okay, great. Well, I grew up in Philly, so I was an Eagles fan. So I've always been an Eagles fan. My dad took me to the games. I love it. I was in the marching band in high school. And so
what did you play? What did you play?
Well, in marching band, I didn't play anything. I was the flag squad leader. So
you were a flag squad girl.
The ones who like toss.
Now let me ask you this: is that aspiring? If you're like a flag girl, are you looking saying, "I really want to be a cheerleader"? I mean, did you ever want to be a cheerleader instead?
No, I really didn't. No, you know what? I started twirling the rifles. I actually started.
Oh, there you go. That's hip. That's hip.
And moved to the flags. Mainly just because I just didn't want to have to march around playing an.
Maybe you were more secure. When I was like in high school and middle school, well, I think this is me now anyway, but not that I'm more radically secure. I was always looking up the next rung on the social ladder. I mean, I was always looking at who was above me, which was everybody.
That was me too. I absolutely was there. But see, we had an interesting little thing happening in our high school. We had two separate sets of popular people. And that was a kind of unusual in the 1980s. I mean, 80s was like the 16 Candles era, right? And the Breakfast Club era. But we had two separate sets of popular people. One was the cheerleaders and the jocks, and the other were the artists, the theater people. And I was a theater person. And so my whole senior year, I was actually one of the most popular people in my school because I was an actor and also director. I directed the very first student play at Lower Cape May Regional High School.
I don't feel cool enough to talk to you now. I'm signing off. Everybody, this was a great show. Thanks for being on the podcast. I'm a second or third tier guy. I mean, you're top tier. You grew up in Cape May. I love South Jersey.
Oh yeah, I love
South Jersey.
It's fun and it's got a culture of its own. Let me tell you. But I met beautiful, beautiful people along the way who really poured into me. Both, you know, Mr. Mathis, who was our theater person, he was our theater director, Mr. Yurevich, who was our orchestra director, all my friends, you know, Dottie Brandt, who was my youth group leader, who really in many ways kind of discipled me growing up. They were all beautiful. And also, of course, my friends, Joanna Lund and Angel Huertas. And so, I mean, these are the people who kind of grounded me in that time. It also, though, was the South. I mean, not only was it South Jersey, but technically, if the Mason-Dixon line had gone across New Jersey, it would.
Yeah.
And they knew it. I mean, so we had some serious racial incidents happen to our family in my senior year that most people didn't know about because we didn't go around talking about it. But like we had two kids come to our house every night for a week, yell at our house, N-words, go back to Africa. We don't want you here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. South Jersey could be a pretty racist place.
It's for real. And that happened in the next generation too. My brother lived in that same house, inherited it from my dad or bought it from my dad. And he had the same issue again and again in every generation. And every generation had to go to the school, Titleman Junior High, and fight for our kids, the kids in our family, to be put into college-bound math and reading. Every single, including me, was put into general math, general reading, no matter what the grades were. They just funneled black kids into general.
Well, how many black folks were in your school growing up? And what?
Not very many. Like
okay.
We're talking basically all the black folks were in gen ed. I mean, like that was, there were like 2 or 3 black kids in college bound and honors classes. I was one of them in college bound, not honors. And then maybe 2, maybe 4 to be generous. Right. And everybody else was kind of funneled into general education. And that's how they did the track system. They basically created one school system, but they segregated the school system via tracks. And so it was just assumed that the black kids were going to go into the kind of the worker bee class, you know, the general ed, the folks who were going to work at Kmart and who were going to go to jail and support the economy through low cost or no cost labor, because that's what Black people do, right?
Right. This is like Plato's Republic. This is so
Hello.
dark. This is like so dark, right? Here's the worker class. This is very tragic. But this is America, right? Now, I want to just go back to the NFL for a second, right? I think so. We are in an era where everything is partisan, right? And so it's very interesting. You look at before Trump, Democrats tend to had a more sympathetic view of Russia than Republicans did. After Trump, Republicans have a more sympathetic view to Russia. Now Democrats have become more anti-Russia. The NFL, when you look at polling about the NFL, before Trump, Democrats used to have a less favorable view of the NFL than Republicans. Then, the kind of end racism stuff in the end zones and stuff came out. Then Democrats started to like the NFL more and Republicans liked it less. So, I mean, it's just every square inch, right, becomes this battle for our affinities, our allegiances, our souls, right? Because Trump is just everywhere and MAGA is kind of everywhere. And Trump has had a political footprint unlike anything I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Yeah, literally. Let me just say, I actually don't necessarily agree with you about the Russia thing. I think that
I'm just telling you the polling that's over the past few years, that when they've looked at the public opinion on Democrats and Republicans. But
really, well, I mean, I think my experience is that among the far left, you had great sympathy for Russia, particularly around communism. And,
right.
The idealized understanding of communism, one that actually is not really connected to actual Russia. And then in the middle, you kind of had both. But I would say, especially since the 1980s, since Reagan, and since 007, like Russia has always been our nemesis. It's been our cultural nemesis, So I'm not, or even,
I'm not saying the Democrats ever had an overwhelmingly favorable view, but it just that Democrats used to not be as big Russia hawks as Republicans, and that flipped. Because Trump, it's one of those interesting things. Like, I don't know what Trump, like, I just imagine if Trump walked out, like, what would if Trump walked out and said, look, I changed my mind. I think, like, we should only have, like, trans bathrooms, okay? Like, not only we're going to have we're not even going to have male, female, but they're all going to be trans. I mean, with a lot of middle America, okay, I'm not so against trans people after all. All right, we can, I mean, it's just, what could he say? Or how far could he go with things that before the base kind of, it makes me curious.
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I think when you really ask the question, the heart of the question you're asking is this about what he's saying or is this about him? And I think it's about him. I think that he has created a cult around himself that will say yes to anything he says or does, because particularly the legislative class, they have tied their fates to him. But also so have the voters. I mean, the voters who vote for him have tied their moral universe to him. So I think they would figure out a way to make it okay within their minds. They've already done that. I mean, in many ways, he flipped on abortion, I mean, he was, there's got to be the death penalty or some kind of criminal prosecution for women. And then he ran on the fact this time that he was not going to create a federal abortion ban. Well, that goes directly against what many of his supporters actually wanted, was a federal abortion ban. So either they don't believe him or they figured out a way to justify it in their minds, I literally think it's very cultish in that there is no center. There's no moral center. The center is him.
Yeah. And is this, I mean, some days I wonder, is this the post-ideological age? Is it him? Is it just that we're more tribe than ideology, right? That my team, if my team is I mean, this is Jonathan Haidt's work, right? The Righteous Mind, that we're so tribal, right? And this is sort of in our DNA, and tribalism has helped us evolve. and helped us sort of become what we are today. But I mean, on some level, is this reverting to tribalism? Like, this is my team. What my team says, I'll go with. And Trump is the icon for the team. And we kind of, David French, who's a friend of mine and been on this podcast several times. And, here's a guy that, I mean, there's no one more loyal to the conservative movement, right? A pro-life guy, right? I mean, graduates Harvard Law, goes and volunteers to go to Iraq. I mean, his bona fides, right? And he and his wife, Nancy, I mean, they have just been maligned and awful racist things said to them about their kid. They've adopted African kids, all this stuff. And this is just because of his views on Trump. Everything else he would align, and then he's been embraced by the left, right? A lot of his views would be reprehensible if to people on the left, but hey, he's against Trump. So, hey, we wrap up. And so I just wonder, is that the barometer for everything these days?
So, I mean, I think that in a simplified rubric, yes, you can say that. But I also think that we are living in a kind of a simplified rubric, in that everything becomes clearer when you have an extreme that is pushed to the center. When you have the extreme of Nazism in the White House, you have literally a Heil salute by someone who is now really in many ways the shadow president. And everybody is now trying to justify it. Well, they're justifying it because they have to live with themselves, because they've now tied their identity to not just the party, but the person of Trump, who has this shadow president actually running things. So there's a way that I think a lot of this is being pushed because of identity. Trump ran on an identity politics ticket. White. He is. It is explicit now. He is trying to make America white again, and you can see it in all of his hiring. He hasn't hired one Black person or a person of color. Not really. To
and this is the DEI critic, right? If you looked at resumes, right, for defense secretary, say, right,
come on,
and didn't know, I mean, if you sent them to one of our conservative friends who didn't believe in DEI, and you just had Hesketh's resume and Lloyd Austin's, they'd say, well, this is diversity hire. This guy's not qualified. I mean, Lloyd Austin is a 4-star, or 3-star general or 2-star general had tons of experience running big organizations. That's what's interesting that you,
including this one.
That you have folks that are that the anti-DEI crowd that are just so unapologetic about defending people that just normally wouldn't get a second look for the job. I mean, RFK, an interesting guy. And look, I'm getting back into fitness, so I have watched some of his lifting videos, which I really, I think he's a fit guy. I'd like to be as fit as he is at his age.
Funny.
But what qualifies that guy to be DHS? He's got no qualifications even related to the office, right? I mean, this is, but it's just a fascinating moment.
Well, I think that's the thing, is if you think of this logically, it doesn't make sense. But if you think of this in terms of the cult of fascism, like, this is a fascist government that is coming to power, and those who are saying yes to it, who are not pushing back against it, who are not calling it what it is, are actually giving away the reality that they kind of like it. Either they kind of like it, or they're willing to deal with it. They're willing to stand for an America that is not America.
When you say fascist, right? Because this is a word that I think.
This is what I mean.
Tell me, because that's a term that is getting bantered around a lot.
But it didn't.
And it's right, and it's not something that tends to be. I think a lot of people haven't read a lot about fascism. A lot of people don't know a lot about it. I mean, when you're saying that to the average person, what do you mean when you say fascist?
Yeah, it's not a pejorative. It's a description, right? So a fascist government is a kind of government where a single leader rules over and above any kind of elected officials or legislative branch or class. It is the consolidation of power into a single person or a single small group of people. So an oligarchy can be a kind of fascist government. The Nazis were a fascist government.
Could you have like, okay, because just oligarchy, right? That could be authoritarian, but not fascist necessarily, right? I mean, I wonder how race plays into it, nationhood plays into it, right?
It does. It does play. So that's a good point. One of the things that actually distinguishes a fascist government is that it is the ruling class is often actually identified as a particular race. So in Nazism, it was white, quote, Aryan race, right? Here, it's actually being identified as white, the white race. That's it. Race is actually playing a large part. Do you realize that part of what has just happened, just on Friday, they started to open the doors to white people, white Afrikaners in South Africa who want to defect from South Africa because Black people are actually beginning to take power in South Africa. They're saying, come to America. White Afrikaners who are apartheid sympathizers. That's not the case for all white Afrikaners. In fact, it's actually the minority. But to that minority, they're saying, come on, you can find a place here in America.
Wow. I mean, that's remarkable. That's remarkable. Well, Elon's South African, right?
That's exactly right. And that's
a lot of, it's very interesting. So I came across a week or so ago a remarkable poll from the UK, and it was discussed on the Bill Maher show. And actually, the guest said that there's correlative data in the United States, but in this British poll, 50% of Gen Zers, 50% said that they need a strong man as prime minister, one that's not really hindered or accountable to Parliament. This is not old white guys. Okay, wow. These aren't Afrikaners. All right. This is 50% of Gen Z. And I've seen similar polls about when you look at young people that they just, the polls I've seen are more like, the numbers are quite similar. And the questions are more like, how important, is it important for you to live in a democracy? And young people tend to, in surprisingly large numbers, are saying no. Do we live in a post-democratic age? And as a Christian, what do you do about it? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
It's a very bad thing. And here's the reason why. On the very first page of the Bible, looking at this from a Christian perspective, this is actually looking from the Hebrew Bible. First page of the Bible is, in our Bible, Genesis. So now we're looking at the first page of Genesis, the first chapter of Genesis, which was written by a company of priests who were on their way out. They had just experienced 70 years of enslavement and being taken out, and colonization taken out of their place and carted to Babylon, a nation that is not their own. In that space, they were told, you were created to be enslaved to the gods. They were told, and because you are the prizes of war, enslaved to us as well, right? So they had 3 to 5 generations that went through that kind of brainwashing, that mentality. And then as they are exiting that horrific trial, they decide to sit and to write down their own creation story. And that is what we see on the first page of the Bible. It's that creation story, which actually comes to us in the form of an epic Hebrew poem. And the high point of that epic Hebrew poem, written by people who had been enslaved for 5 generations, it declares that all humanity was created in the image of God. All humanity. And that, when they wrote that, when they said, and let us make humankind in our image and in our likeness, and let them have dominion. When those priests wrote that, they performed a revolutionary act, because never before in the history of civilizations had anybody placed the image of God in all people. They had only placed the image of God in the kings and queens, the pharaohs, like the 1%. But here They place the image of God in everyone. And what they do when they do that is to democratize power. And they were just about to enter into their own rule in the temple. They were going to, go like be the leaders of this newly freed Israel. And they could have grabbed power for themselves, but they decided not to. Instead, they democratized power. So when we ask the question, is democracy important? It's vitally important. It's important because what it takes for us to live into the humanity we were created for, to live into the image of God within us, inherent human dignity, the ability to exercise stewardship of the world, make choices that impact the world, exercise agency, which is rada, which is dominion, that word that comes right after that. Let us make them in our image and let them exercise dominion. All in the same breath, cannot extricate one from the other. What it means to be human is to be able to exercise agency. Well, guess what? It's not perfect, but democracy is the best governing structure we have on the planet that gives every person within that jurisdiction the ability to exercise some level of agency, even if it is simply the vote. And that's why it was so important that people in the civil rights movement fought so hard for the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, because those two acts established for us the very first time the protection of our constitutional rights granted in the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments. Now, this particular government that has just come into office in the last 2 weeks has been trying to chip away at the Civil Rights Act through chipping away at the 14th Amendment, saying that some people don't have the right to citizenship, even though they're born here. That right was established after the Civil War in order to make sure that citizenship in the United States would never again be counted by race, which it had been up to that point.
Yeah. No. Okay. Democracy. All right. I mean, you have instances like the Arab Spring, right, where oftentimes you give people the vote, they vote authoritarian. This country, right, what we've seen is a populist, a democratic veto to democracy, right? The founding fathers of this country were a little wary of democracy at times, right? They thought, hey, you can trust the people so much.
We have a democratic republic for that reason.
Right. I mean, it seems to me like I look at the Electoral College, right, which we could debate the virtue of it, but the one thing it was for was Donald Trump, right? I mean, the founders could imagine you'd have a demagogue. They thought, look, people vote for demagogues, right? Average people are stressed out. People just don't. It's hard to be a critical thinker, right? You're trying to put food on the table. Life's hard. They thought people are just vulnerable to demagogues, and you need kind of a group of elites. This sounds so terrible, but you kind of need to be Plato's Republic a couple times a year, and you need the elites to say no to the demagogues, right? I mean, how good is democracy if these are the results it gives?
Well, but see, this is the thing. Democracy is amazing, but what we have is an injured democracy. There are reports that are coming out right now. Actually, in the last week, somebody sent this to me. That one report that is showing the impact of voter suppression and voter intimidation in this last election. I mean, we know right here in Philadelphia, what were there, like 3 separate bomb scares on election day in different voting polls? They shut them down. Do you know how many people were not able to vote as a result of that happening all over the country? Well, apparently not only because of the bomb scares, but also because of voters being completely wiped from the rolls or their votes not being tallied. 3 million people, more than 3 million votes were not tallied that should have been tallied or would have been tallied in a normal year.
Yeah, I just read that.
They lost
that
by
stuff.
1.5 million.
Yeah, could have swayed the election. Could have swayed the election clearly.
Swayed it. She would have won.
Yeah,
really almost in a landslide. You have 3.5 million votes that were not counted. So I'm not saying, okay, we got it. We are where we are and that's it. But the reality is that you can't necessarily say then that the voters voted for this. No, we did not.
Well, I mean, a big chunk of them did. I mean, a lot of people.
But the big chunk votes for, anything. That's what democracy is about. You're supposed count every
I
vote.
mean, that's the point. That I mean, this is the challenge of a lot of folks out there. I'll read you a passage here from. Do you know Patrick Deneen's work?
No.
He's at Notre Dame, and he wrote a book called Why Liberalism Failed, and he's a political theorist. Obama, actually, this was on Obama's reading list one year, and he was recommending it to people when he was president. So this is just a passage in the intro. Liberalism, and here he's talking about not left, right, but the liberal Enlightenment project, right, where we would have constitutional republics, where the individual, largely free markets, largely free people, where the individual, sovereign individual, is the foundation of the state.
Right.
Liberalism has failed not because it fell short, but because it was true to itself. It has failed because it has succeeded. As liberalism has become more fully itself, as its inner logic has become more evident and self-contradicting, and self-contradictions manifest, it has generated pathologies that are once deformations of its claims, yet realizations of liberal ideology. A political philosophy that was launched to foster greater equity, defend a pluralistic tapestry of different cultures and beliefs, protect human dignity, and of course expand liberty in practice, generates titanic inequality, enforces uniformity and homogeneity, fosters material and spiritual degradation, and undermines freedom. And its success can be measured by its achievement of the opposite of what we have believed it would achieve. Rather than seeing the accumulating catastrophe as evidence of our failure to live up to liberalism's ideals, we need rather to see clearly that the ruins it has produced are the signs of its very success. To call for the cures of liberalism's ills by applying more liberal measures is tantamount to throwing gas on a raging fire. It will only deepen our political, social, economic, and moral crisis. Lisa, I ask you, is he crazy?
He's not crazy, but he is incomplete in his analysis. And so what I would say is that the reason why liberalism was not enough is because liberalism never took into consideration its own racism. That's why liberalism did not succeed. And that you can actually see very, very clearly the hierarchies of human belonging that were so stark for so many over the last year and a half, especially since October 7th. We saw the heinous attack by Hamas on the neighboring settlements. 1,200 people died in the course of that first week. And then we saw the heinous attack on Gaza that took place over the course of 16 months and killed more than 50,000, some say 60, some say literally 180,000. The Lancet report is now over 200,000 people, if you count direct and indirectly dead as a result of the conflict there, as a result of this conflict. So you have, and yet you have many people on the liberal side of the aisle in America that did not bat an eye, did not want us to talk about it. In fact, even made it illegal, agreed with the conservative movement to make it illegal to talk about it. Well, that confirmed to us that liberal or conservative doesn't really matter. We still fundamentally in the United States of America are bound by a hierarchy of human belonging. There are some people who we say are worth fighting for and protecting, and there are other people who are not worth our protection and who are not worth living. It is okay to kill them. And that was disillusioning for a lot of millennials, and also I would say Gen Zers. There's certainly many Gen Xers. Black women were among the first to say, no, we can't do this, even though it was going against Kamala Harris's candidacy. This is one of the reasons why the vote was suppressed, is because, and it wasn't suppressed in this way by some nefarious means. It was suppressed by liberals' own revelation of their own ascent to human hierarchy. So, yes, you're right. Liberalism failed, but it did not fail because it did too much of what it was supposed to do. We don't have just a general liberal government. We have a quote, classic, in a classic sense, a liberal democracy, meaning a democracy that has institutions in place that are supposed to protect the least of these, the ones that Jesus called the ones who are the most vulnerable, those who are hungry, those who are thirsty, those who are sick and disabled, those who are immigrants, those who are imprisoned, those who have unjust and inequitable interactions with the justice, quote, justice system, and those who are impoverished and have nothing. Those people have institutions that are supposed to be in place to protect them. But the problem is that in our liberal democracy, race has won. Race made it possible for us to chip away at those institutions to the point where now, literally, we are on the verge of blowing them up and saying, oh, well, blowing up public education, blowing up what little public health care we have in the Obamacare system, the Affordable Care Act, blowing up the agreements that we've made, even in the last Trump administration, to stop mass incarceration. Well, guess what? Now we have prisons being built for huge amounts of immigrants, right? They're not going to deport them. They're going to put them in there and they're going to throw away the key, because every time somebody fills a bed, that's money on the stock market that goes up. So we have failed, not because of liberalism, but because of racism.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I do. When I read Deneen, though, I hear the voices of people like John Howard Yoder, Stanley Hauerwas, John Milbank, Christian theologians that have been huge on the sort of Christian scene. Some of our listeners wouldn't know them, but these are people that, as liberal Protestantism was really struggling to find itself, these were folks that articulated a sort of more robust. They were arguing for a more robust revisitation of the Christian story. And Hauerwas said this kind of stuff, right? That liberalism, Stanley famously, the problem with liberalism is it makes really shitty people. And in this sense of in his critique would be that basically the Enlightenment project says the individual sovereign, right? The individual is sovereign. And you quoted Genesis. The tension is the Bible tends to say God is sovereign.
Yes.
Right? And that fundamentally, that people like Hauerwas would say that liberalism is a rejection of the sovereignty of God in place of the sovereignty of the human autonomous individual.
I agree that he says that, but I disagree with him. So yes, he says that, but the reality is that the individual autonomy of the individual gives them the ability to then claim the sovereignty of God. And that's where we get the freedom of religion in the very first amendment to the Constitution. The freedom of religion establishes the ability of individuals to choose the God, the religion that they will abide by in their life, or no religion. And that is freedom. And our founders had experienced life under autocracy, where they did not have that freedom. So they made sure that we had it in the First Amendment.
Do you think that the American Revolution was justified in the sense of, Paul says in Romans 13, pay your taxes, to just obey the state and pay your taxes to an emperor that, by first century emperors, depending on how we date Rome, these are not, to take up arms against a Christian king because you think you're paying too much taxes. This sounds like the Tea Party. Are our founding fathers really Tea Party Republicans? Hey, I don't like taxes and I'm willing to kill people for it. At some point, isn't like Romans 13 against fighting violence against Christian, a violent overthrow of Christian leaders?
No, what Romans 13 is actually all about is not resisting the authority that has been given. In other words, think about this. Romans 13 is what the civil rights movement did on Selma's Bridge on Bloody Sunday, or in the Birmingham Children's March is even a greater example, where they marched, they got jailed, they did not resist being jailed, They filled the jails with kids. They decided, let's do it. Let's fill the kids.
Civil disobedience.
Let's do it. That's civil disobedience. That's Romans 13.
That's a little different than
that from jail.
Right. But that's a little different than the founders, right? Like civil disobedience is a little different than, hey, we're going to kill people that are a Christian government, like Parliament full of Christians.
But it's not Christian government. How can you say that
and they were Christian? I mean, they were Christians.
Government. They were the heart of slaveocracy in that time. They were the largest slaveocracy in that time. But
ironically, had we not fought the revolution, we would have ended slavery sooner, because England ended slavery before we did. I mean, they were more progressive. Maybe they were more progressive on slavery than we were.
Maybe they would have, but at the same time, the reality is that was not a Christian government. That was an empire. An empire. First of all, governments can't be Christian or not Christian. People can be Christian or not Christian.
Right. So the Parliament was full of Christians. The king was Christian.
The king claimed to be Christian, and the king enslaved huge amounts of people and got all of his wealth from the slave trade. So whether or not Jesus considers him Christian is really what matters. And I can't say what that is, but what I can do is do what Jesus said.
That's a hard standard, right? Who would Jesus? I don't think I would meet Jesus' standard.
Look at the fruit. That's all you got to do is just look at the fruit. Okay. If the fruit is slaveocracy, likely it is not Christian.
I can agree with that. I think that's.
That's actually pretty simple.
You got it's not. Yeah. It's not revolutionary. Yeah, that's. So yeah, I mean, I think this stuff is all. I wonder about this. I read Deneen and I listen to these voices like Harawas and stuff, and I'm wondering because you do seem to have so much illiberalism, right? I didn't think you have it on the. I mean, basically, you have an illiberal government right now, right? You have folks. You have a president and a cabinet populated with folks who really. I don't know that Trump understands Deneen or something, but some people like. I mean, Steve Bannon certainly does. Mm-hmm. You have these folks who are illiberal, and you have it on the far left. I mean, I've now among some progressives, liberals an insult. When people say, "Oh, you're such a liberal," they mean a classic liberal. I mean, they mean Enlightenment liberalism, and that's an insult, right? I mean, or they'll call you a free speech absolutist or something like that. So, I mean, I wonder with so much illiberalism, where so many folks are just like the liberal project, it's just over. I mean, what's the Christian vision in the midst of that, right? How do you make a Christian case for something that a lot of people just think is a burnout hang up from the Enlightenment?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we're having this conversation now, because I do think that we are in the midst of a huge transition, a transformation in our society. But I don't think that, I think that the language is going to expand beyond the frameworks that have come to us from Europe. I think that this is naturally and it is fundamentally a decolonizing moment. And what we are experiencing is the last great whiplash of the colonizers in the person of Donald Trump and the coup that he and his people are actually exacting right now in our government. They are trying to reestablish, ironically, the whiteness of the world that liberalism, along with conservatism, came from. They were both birthed from the same womb, the womb of Western civilization, that reaches back through Aristotle to Plato and beyond, right? So in that rubric, you have dualism at its heart. You have, and by dualism, I mean you have a rubric that is either good or bad, black or white. Everything is either or, enemy or friends. You don't have human. Human is not in that rubric. And I actually think that we are moving into an age of decolonizing our thinking, decolonizing our governance. I think that's going to be the next wave after this, is a wave where we figure out a way for more of the people to actually take part in actual governance. And our dependence on European models and frameworks of thinking is epistemologies, to be fancy. That is being challenged. And I think it's being challenged because we actually see the fruit of it now. Where did all that lead? It leads to what we have right now on both sides. It's disillusion.
That's incredibly well said. I think of the Colonial Project. I even think of the conflict right now with in Israel, Palestine. Right. I mean, this is outplaying of colonialism, right? Where you sort of see, where everybody just all across the world, we just say, oh, we're going to put you here, we're going to put you here, we're going to put you, we're going to draw the lines here, right? And then when you sort of step back and all right, you guys figure it out yourselves. I mean, this is we wouldn't have had Iraq, right, without colonialism and so many other failed states, and
we didn't. And did you see that the way that the whole world went up in an uproar when Trump just casually said, "Oh, we'll own it. We'll own Gaza, and the people will have to go." I mean, that is naked colonialism. That is literally bringing us back to the turn of the 20th century colonialism, literally the colonialism that established Israel in the first place. And so when you realize, oh, that is what is now occupying the White House, well, then things just become very clear.
When you hear Trump say things like that,
yeah,
right? Mm-hmm. You hear, like I watch every press conference he does because I'm insane because I haven't gone to enough therapy in my life.
Right, you're a glutton for punishment. Yeah, okay.
But like I'm addicted to because I find his communication style like it's just the best political theater I've ever seen. And the things he says, like, we're going to take it over, and and he just stops. Right, there's this bus. We're going to do a great job. We're like, it just assure us, right? Like, but I mean, emotionally, when you hear him talk, how do you respond? When you like what are you feeling when you hear Trump talk?
Disgust, like truly, and like want to hurt.
At a physical level, I mean, does it manifest? Okay,
literally want to throw up, and then particularly with that in that press conference, want to throw up because on every level, what he's actually doing in the heavenlies, in the theological realm. He is warring with the image of God on earth. In other words, he is declaring war on the sovereignty of God.
That's not good.
No, that's not. He is taking power. He is trying to dominate the call and the capacity of the Palestinian people and the people, mind you, of Israel to decide for themselves. And he goes in and says, we're just going to claim it. That is war. That is war against the capacity of Palestinian people to exercise their own agency, which was established as a fundamental right of humanity on the first page of the entire Bible.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about him, right, that I was just listening to a podcast where a pretty story journalist was saying that he had never he had not covered somebody so talented on the campaign trail except Bill Clinton, right? I mean, he has this preternatural way of intuiting. It's strange about what voters feel, what they want to hear, at least his base. And what's strange is a lot of this stuff is popular. I mean,
I have a thought about this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I share my thought? This is actually this set me apart in opposition actually to most of the liberal media chatter, like MSNBC, some CNN, although I never call CNN liberal, it's not. But when he did his the Republican convention and he came out and he spoke for like 2 hours. It was so crazy.
Hulk Hogan, the whole, all over
the place. But you know what? I'm from South Jersey. We already established that, right? Like, my parents lived in Absecon, which is 10 minutes from Atlantic City. And my dad was the principal of Atlantic City High School for a long time. And he told me, you can't do any business in Atlantic City at that point. I don't know if it's still the truth, without dealing with the mob. You have to.
Yeah, absolutely.
The mob is going to be somewhere. And this man was in Atlantic City for decades. What I saw in that speech was a mobster. I saw somebody who was literally trying to channel Corleone. Like, he literally came, when you talk, when you do your imitation of him, you're actually doing an imitation of Corleone. Like,
yeah. It's a mob. It's a.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
I'm just coming out here. I'm just going to share a couple of thoughts with you. You know,
that's good. I didn't think about this. I do another podcast where I do the Trump impression. I'm gonna work on that. I'm gonna do more Corleone. How you just punctuated the sentences. That's better. I like that. That would make it better.
I've never done a Trump, impersonation in my entire life, but I can do Corleone. And when I do Corleone, guess what I'm doing? I'm doing Trump because Trump is doing Corleone. He is acting, and he is trying to act like a mob boss because he knows mob bosses have people afraid of them. And people are ingratiated when a mob boss pays attention to them and actually, opens up his life. Like, he's not going to be so dangerous with me. I'm going to, you know what I mean? So this is our president. Our president is a fake mobster.
And the patronage stuff, right? Like, you have to get, I think it's interesting. Mm-hmm. Like, you look at from his first administration, a guy like Chris Wray, right? Wouldn't go along with everything because Chris Wray has a network of relationships that he's not going to cash in, right? So he's not going to just pimp out the FBI because his public life and identity goes beyond Trump. So then you get these even Jeff Sessions, right?
Yeah.
Even Jeff Sessions said no, right? A bridge too far, right? Yeah. Right. But it's interesting you bring in Patel and Hesgath and all these guys. These are people that are RFK for HA. These are people that have nothing to lose and everything to gain from the loyalty.
Their entire personhood. Their entire public persona is because of Trump. Trump made them who they are. So they are going to be 100% beholden to him. That's a great point you just made. Yes.
Yeah, and so where I was going with that was what you're saying about the mob boss thing. Right? This is how a mob boss runs, right? It's all loyalty, client based,
100%.
Sort of, yeah. So it's a very
family. Hello.
Yeah, even in the family, right?
No, keep it in the family.
Keep it in the family, right? Yeah.
How many people in his family does he have working around him? It's because you can't trust anybody except for your family. It's freaking it's Corleone.
Keep it in the family except Tiffany. Okay, we don't like Tiffany.
Yes.
So, there must be something right about her if he doesn't like her.
Yeah.
Now, so, what? Okay, so we're in this post-democratic age. A lot of Christians are not entirely uncomfortable with this. And they're Christians, right? We can say they're not Christians if we peer into the heart or whatever. I tend to not peer into many hearts.
Yeah.
I just say if you say you're a Christian, I'll take you at face value. You're a Christian, or if Pew counts them, I'll they're demographically on the team. That's fine. How do you? What do you do with that? How do you? Is there a way to be persuasive and prophetic at the same time to really to call out some of the really reprehensible stuff, and yet at the same time not alienate people, because I think some people are probably persuadable, right? That people are fluid. People often exchange. There are people that voted for Obama and then Trump. This is. How do you process and hold in tension the prophetic and the persuasive, or can't you hold them in tension? How do those things exist in relationship in your head, and because you communicate and write, and you're a lot of people hear your voice.
It's like, first of all, let me just acknowledge for those who are watching online, the sun is going down, and so suddenly all the sun is in my face, and I'm getting shadows and all of that. So
this is the Damascus. So you might be blinded here. This is Damascus Road moment, right?
What it feels like. It's like blinded moment. I'll fix it after I say this. Okay. So I think that this is a moment. I think you have to figure out what's the Kairos moment. Kairos meaning pregnant time, God's time, not Chronos meaning tick, 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 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock time. but kairos meaning what is God birthing into the world time. And so I think that that's really the question right now is what time is it? What kairos is it? And when I ask that question, I really do believe that we are on the verge of birthing a decolonizing movement, era in the US. Now, we've kind of been in that moment. You could actually say that the decolonizing moment began with the civil rights movement in 1954 with the passage of Brown versus the Board of Education. And then after that, and maybe even before that, when you had the first African nations begin to throw off colonization of the UK. And you had all of that running all the way up to South Africa, being the last of the colonized nations to throw off the last large one or significant one that we saw throw off their colonizer, and in a nonviolent way, no less, right? So along with India, again, nonviolently. But now it's the US. And this is being pushed by our demographic shift. The reality that in less than a decade, actually in about a decade, 2035 is what most demographers say, the United States is going to be a majority minority. In other words, majority people of color nation. And because of that demographic shift, we are getting people running around with their hair like in flames, and trying to suppress the vote and successfully doing it, apparently. Trying to reestablish the whiteness of America, voting in Trump and his shadow president, Musk. And okay, because of that demographic shift, be okay when they decide that they want to do anything else that isn't even in alignment with what they thought they were voting for, because at the very least, they will get a white America. And that's the thing that scares them to death. So losing the Department of Education, not so scary. They already kind of went away from that back at the time of Brown versus the Board of Education. They started establishing race schools, and which became Christian school, the whole Christian school movement and the whole homeschooling movement. That was established in order to deal with the integration of public schools. So, it's only like following the lineage now to just do away with public schools altogether. Because it's still about the same thing. It's about race. It's about creating a racial hierarchy. I actually do believe that as people understand more of their own history, how they got where they got, how they came to understand or believe the things they believed. What did their pastor believe? What did their pastor's pastor believe? Where did they go to seminary? What was the history of their seminary? How did their seminary come to be? Was it among those fundamentalist seminaries that came up in the early 20th century that was actually responding to this, quote, liberal project that was trying to help the poor, trying to establish protections, labor protections for white people, no less, in New York City and in urban centers around the country where they were being exploited? Was that where your school, is that where it traces its lineage? Or maybe it was after the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Is that when your school became established? So people need to do some of their own homework and ask those deeper questions in order for them to understand how they came to understand the world as it is today. And then do some work on Jesus, like looking at him in his context, not just what your pastor told you to think about him, but actually asking, what did Jesus mean when he said in Luke 4, I've come to free the oppressed? What did he mean by that? Was it the spiritually oppressed, as my evangelical pastors and Bible study leaders used to insist to me? He wasn't talking about the actual oppressed. He's just talking about the spiritually oppressed. Well, actually, no. He was literally talking about the oppressed because, they didn't know this. But the year he was born, 500 people per day were crucified along the roads of northern Galilee, where he grew up. Why? Because they tried to rise up against Caesar, against empire, which by definition exploits and crushes the image of God. in human beings. So I think, honestly, I just think the church needs to come to Jesus moment where it asks the question, which Jesus are we worshiping? Are we worshiping the Jesus with the sword, the Jesus with the flowing purple robes, who is sitting on a European throne, the fake Jesus? Or are we worshiping brown Jesus, who was a carpenter, meaning a working class human being, who was in occupied territory, occupied by a supremacist empire that never would have looked at him and said, that's a full human being? Which Jesus?
If white Jesus is wearing purple, what is brown Jesus wearing? I mean, what is
Brown.
He's wearing brown. Okay, so he's like a military look, like a fatigues, or what is he? Was Tim? What? I'm trying to picture. Picture brown Jesus' attire.
Think Middle East.
Think Middle East. Sorry, we're thinking Middle Eastern. All right, not purple. He's not wearing purple.
Not wearing purple.
As Trump would say, I like my Jesus not wearing purple. Okay. He probably likes purple, gold. Trump Jesus is gold, certainly, right?
It's a gold crown,
all gold,
sword, and his teeth probably might even have gold pieces that flash in the sun. Like, come on now, that's Trump's Jesus. It's fake. It's fake Jesus. That's what it is.
So you're so you talk about, you've mentioned a little bit your evangelical roots, and would you still identify as evangelical? I mean, do you have you left that behind? How would you self-describe? How would you locate yourself on a sort of religious map? Like what box would you check? Or
it's a really great question, and it's one that honestly I think I've been struggling with for like the last decade. But because the meaning of evangelical has really changed in the public square, and this is a fight that I really used to fight. Oh, I'm evangelical, and we need to save evangelicalism. But I think what I've started to realize is that evangelicalism is a movement born in Europe, for a very particular purpose, and actually did not start in the 1900s or 1800s or 1700s. It started in the 1600s in Europe, and it was a democratizing movement. Actually, the whole movement of evangelicalism was all about bringing the power of the ability to connect with God to the actual people, and not holding it among a few priests who would then be the intermediaries for the people. That was what evangelicalism was all for. They started Bible studies to give people their own literacy in the text and have them be able to have their own relationship with God and all of that. So in a lot of ways, you could even look toward the democracy that was eventually established in the United States as being inspired by that democratizing evangelical movement in Europe. But Europe is not the whole world, and Europe is certainly not the home of Christian faith. The home of Christian faith is the Middle East, and the home of Christian faith did not have the Enlightenment. It had nothing to do with the Enlightenment. It was pre-Enlightenment. When we read every word in the Christian text, in the New Testament and the Old Testament, not one word was written by Calvin or Luther. None of it was written by any of the European movements. And so I think that's part of the decolonizing work that we have to be about, is interrogating the necessity of holding to these frameworks that have been handed to us by Europe, but have implications when made universal. They are not universal. They were good for their time and their place. The evangelistic project was good for its time and its place, but it's a movement among many that we know not of, that also happened in Africa. The very first missionary in the scripture was the Samaritan woman who went out to Samaria and began to talk about Jesus. And then one of the first in Acts 8 that we see missionaries ends up going to Africa. So Africa actually is among the first spaces to get the gospel. And there's a whole development of the church that happens there that is absolutely separate from the history and the doctrines that were established by Europe. So that's part of the reason why we need to do some deeper work in our biblical texts, is we need to extricate ourselves from Western ways of looking at this Afro-Asian text and begin to understand it in its own contexts according to its own rules, not the rules established by empires in Europe.
I mean, it's just everything is so dialectical, right? Because on one level, the because I agree with what you're saying, especially the colonializing lenses, hermeneutical lenses, right, that just shape a text, right? But at the same time, the Enlightenment was about, hey man, the pre-modern legacy we have is just not working, right? We're killing each other at very rapid rates. We got the 30 years where, like, maybe if we used reason more and less tradition and authority, we'd have more pluralism and we'd kill each other less. I mean, so in some sense, the Enlightenment is a humanizing force on Christianity, right? Because pre-modern Christianity is pretty barbaric. I mean, there's a lot of stuff done by pre-moderns. I mean, we've got crusades, we've got misogyny, we've got pogroms, we said no, misogyny's never going out of style. I mean, it's like basic black, you can always wear it, right? Misogyny, right? I mean, this is, sadly the basic purple, right? Gold, basic gold. Okay, we love a little imperial gold.
Right. Basic gold. I mean, here's the thing is that when you look at pre-modern, as in pre-Enlightenment Christianity, there is not just one stream, right? You have the Desert Fathers, you have the Desert Mothers. You have streams of faith that come from indigenous peoples and also that are kind of caught by indigenous peoples around the world at different times, not actually even given by missionaries, but just understood, kind of given, I believe, by the Spirit, that are not operating according to the laws that you just talked about, the laws of crusades, or the inertia of crusades, of domination. I just think that to say that it all stemmed from there is wrong. I would say that version of Christianity that you just described is the version that comes to us from Constantine forward. So Constantinian Christianity, imperial Christianity, has always birthed what you just described. But before Constantine in the first century church, you absolutely did not see that. So, and that is also pre-modern. So if we want to go pre-modern, I would not say stop at Constantine. I'd say stop at Acts, like go to Acts.
Stop it. I like that. I like that. Stop at the book of Acts.
Yeah.
All right. I like that. Well, I mean, I think there are Christianities, there are Enlightenments. We all contain multitudes, right? It's just like if you ask somebody who's Scot, well, it depends on what's their relationship to me. And I think the same thing is true about traditions, right? That they're always myriad and they're complex. And I think it's almost like the more complex. Usually, I think complexities are friend. No, I mean, but usually. Let me ask you, you've been so generous with your time. I want to ask, as we wrap up, these are really precarious times for a lot of people, right? A lot of people just feel like they're losing it. And there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of pain, a lot of struggle. If you're going to tell our listeners, here's one thing you could read, or one thing you can listen to, one thing you watch that'd be good for their soul, be good for their mind, would be inspiring or comforting or stoking for their imaginations, what would you recommend?
I was just talking with somebody about this earlier today. I was in a conversation with a bunch of Christian leaders who are undergoing like a whole year of multiple different pilgrimages that are shifting and challenging their worldviews. Most of them are evangelical. And to answer your question about whether or not I'm evangelical, I would say, I got to be honest about the roots of my faith. Yeah, I mean, evangelicalism at its heart is that you believe in the truth of the Scripture. I actually do believe in the truth of the Scripture. You actually do believe in the transformation that happens in conversion. I actually do believe that our faith has to be activist, not just what we think, but what we do. And I believe in the power of the cross, right, and the resurrection, not just the cross, but also the resurrection. So yeah, I qualify as an evangelical, but I am not beholden to a Western rubric of thinking, which is what I got at earlier. What I would say now is that for the folks who are looking for a way to actually take action on this, to move forward, hey, read my book, The Very Good Gospel. If you're looking for one step you can take to begin to consider another way, a new way of thinking about this good news of Jesus, there was actually a point back in 2022. I was blown away when I saw this, but the top 3 books under Christian interest or something on Amazon, mine was number 1, The Very Good Gospel, and right under it were 2 books that were trying to take aim at the very good gospel. They were, like fundamentalist books that were saying, there's another gospel out there, you have to down it, whatever. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know. That book was written in 2016. So I was like not expecting it to reach that in 2022. But I do think...
Hey, all press is good press.
Oh, exactly.
Right? All press is good press, right?
Exactly. And so I do think, though, that this is one of those moments. We are in a moment where you just really have to, you got to know the implications of this good news that you are proclaiming or that you are standing your life on. And the implication of the, let's say, 4 spiritual laws that a lot of our more conservative evangelical friends stand on. God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, but you are sinful and therefore separated from God. But Jesus died to pay the penalty of your sin. And all you need to do is pray this prayer and you get to go to heaven. Like, the implications of that are that your faith actually has nothing to do with your public ethics. And therefore it gives you free license to do anything in your public ethics. And that is not the faith of Brown Jesus. That is not the faith of the one who said in his very last sermon, if you get nothing more from me, get this, what you do to the least deserving prisoner, to the most hungry, to the most thirsty, to the one who is the least deserving immigrant, and to the most destitute, you have done to me.
Lisa,
yeah.
Lisa, that's beautiful. Lisa Sharon Harper, author of The Very Good Gospel. This has been a very good conversation. Thank you for it.
Much. Thanks, Scott.